Well, hello everyone. Um, so I decided it's been quite a while actually, and I think that this video is a little bit overdue, but I still get that question of why don't you practice yoga anymore? And so I thought that I would do a video addressing that very thing and just break it down for people who do follow me, for people who kind of want to know, like, why would someone stop a yoga practice? Or more specifically, why would someone stop an Ashtanga yoga practice? People who don't know have assumed things like burnout or injury, and neither of those are applicable in my case. Okay, I didn't burn out. I had plenty of injuries, and that never stopped me. So when I began the yoga practice, I was in high school. I was recovering from an eating disorder. I was 14 at my lowest point. So I was very young when I entered this world. And I began working with an herbalist to heal. I started to change my mindset. I started studying metaphysics, quantum physics. Like, I was very young when I got into this world. And as someone who had been a gymnast, who had been a swimmer, and also was just getting into diving, I really enjoyed the whole body component of working out, but I did not enjoy the competitive aspect of it. You know, I had a coach when I was 12 throw me against the wall because he didn't like my attitude. Now, like, in today's world, he'd be behind bars like that, right? Like, you just don't touch children like that. And it was very stressful, right? So here I am in the process of trying to heal. And when I stumbled upon yoga, for me, it was like, wow, here's this thing that I can do with my body. And I can explore in a healthy space. And, you know, very specifically had the thought, if I can't love how I look, right, because I had an eating disorder and body dysmorphia, well, then maybe I can love myself for what I can do. And that was thus the first step in my healing process. I fell in love with the Ashtanga practice, and that just became like the centerpiece of my world for 2 decades, really. And everything orbited around my yoga practice, everything. Jobs that I would take, relationships I would have, my sleep, everything, my diet, like, that's how important it was to me. And I really did have this amazing love affair. But here's the thing about life. Like, we have this law called impermanence. And nothing is static. Nothing is permanent. Everything is changing. And so not only did my practice change, my relationship to the practice changed, but also the community changed. So I'm going to go through some reasons why I left. So first and foremost, when I began the yoga practice, like I said, I was young. At that time, yoga pants did not exist, okay? If you practiced yoga, you wore like tie pants, or you wore Alibaba pants, or you wore leggings, right? Like, I might go to Dance Skin and pick up some leggings, but they didn't have yoga pants. So this was still a time where it was something that I could, and forgive my terminology here, but I could escape to my yoga practice, right? It wasn't this like mainstream commodity that it is now. It is such a commodity now. And I'm very much a free market capitalist, but when my yoga practice becomes a commodity, it doesn't really have the same value to me. So at the time when I started, I was rogue, right? I was going against the grain. I was doing something different. My mother thought that, I was taking on cult-like beliefs, and there was concern about, like, is this a religion? And I mean, that's how what do I say, like how not standard or normal or mainstream it was. Okay, very quickly, because this was like 1996, 7, 8, I'm getting into it. And then around 2000, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, that momentum started to pick up. We had brands like Hardtail come on the map, and then later we had Lululemon. And of course, it's a commodity. It's a big time commodity. And I've always been an anti-trender by nature. And I've had a couple of conversations with some of the older teachers who have been around since way before me. And, for them, it was a practice for rebels, and it no longer is, right? Like, it's a standardized thing. It's become very structured in the sense that, like, everyone does the same thing, and it's no longer this independent, personalized practice. So when something becomes, again, like, it's not just in the Ashtanga world, like, obviously when you have booty yoga, like, that just is such a disrespect to, that is such a disrespect to the practice itself. But even if we separate, or we try to separate ourselves from, like, the hot yoga people, right? We're still dealing with the fact that so many people had jumped on this bandwagon that when it's small, you can focus in on yourself. But once you get too big, it needs structure. And so in order to have that structure, now we're going, what's right, what's wrong, where do I lean, who's right, who's wrong? And now it becomes more like a religion than this, like, independent personal practice. And that was kind of like my second reason, right? Like, the practice was no longer customized to the individual. It was, especially when Guruji died and Sharat took over, he and Kino turned this thing into such a money-making machine that before COVID-19 became a worldwide issue, you could see that as far as authorizations went, that process of going to India and getting authorized was becoming very top heavy. So there were more authorized teachers than even students to draw from, right? Everyone's getting authorized because, again, we're going to take it back to this commodity it had become. Yoga was no longer a spiritual practice, and I taught, right? Like, I was very much against teaching for the longest time, and I finally just gave in and taught because I didn't want to keep denying people who wanted to learn from me. I did my very best to not turn it into some sort of like cattle herding. That's just not my style, right? I preferred working one-on-one even until the very end. But again, like, when you create a bigger system that turns it into like a religion of dogma, it's no longer about the individual, right? Like, the individual can't say, hey, well, this is my body and what I need. It becomes about, like, are you obeying the standard, which is a completely different conversation. And that doesn't work for me. Like, I'm always going to do what's right for me. Always. Like, I'm always going to honor myself above and beyond any standard. I don't care whose standard or what standard. Like, I'm always going to honor myself first. So that was also a reason, right? So, like, now there's this community that has been watered down to people who have practiced for 3 years getting authorized, which to me was a complete disrespect to the teachers who had certifications from Guruji who'd been practicing for 30 years. And so I couldn't support that, right? Another reason was, kind of like back to that dogma conversation. When you stop individualizing things, you stop critically analyzing, and you start just going, well, what are the lines? Just tell me if it's right or wrong. Instead of just kind of going inside and saying, does this work for me or not, right? Because we all have our own boundaries. And if we ask the right questions, we'll discover if something is good for us or not. Like, should I internally rotate here or should I externally rotate here? Well, if you go inside your body and you feel it out, you'll know. You don't have to comply. And then if you can't mold to it, be shamed for it, right? But that was a big part of what has happened in the community. And again, once something becomes like hijacked, like by the mainstream, it just changes its flavor. So we're talking like standards and norms so that way they can herd a bigger group as opposed to allowing it to be for the individual. Okay, that was a big change that happened after 2010. And then you've also got things like, again, no one really thinking for themselves. So then you take something like the principle of ahimsa and you go, oh, well, I guess this means I can't ever eat meat again, which is totally like where the hell did you get that thought, right? And so like they take the idea that you can't harm something to mean that you can't ever meet your own physiological needs, therefore everyone must be vegan. And if you're not a vegan, you're wrong, right? So it's like you have to comply with these religious standards of the practice, and now you have to be a vegan, and now you have to only drink green drinks, and now you have to like somewhere along the line these like things took off, like they caught fire and like they just became normal when that was never the case before. And so I guess, like I said, the hijacking from this like woke community who really doesn't even understand the principles of the practice. I mean, yoga, you know, in its core, if you really, you know, and I'm not even a historian, like I am not a philosopher, but I know enough about the practice to know that this is a practice that was established for warriors. This was not a passive practice where we pretended to be positive. Like that's bullshit, right? So I couldn't get behind that. Like in order to transcend anything, you have to recognize it for what it is. False positivity is bullshit. It's the denial of what you're truly experiencing in any given moment, just so that way you don't offend someone, is not healing, is not helpful, is bullshit. And that's kind of what it's turned into, right? Like, let's please everybody by being vegan, and let's make sure we're doing this and we're doing that. And it's, yeah, it's no longer this sacred personal practice where I think for myself, like, am I finding that union with the divine, you know? And that's what yoga is. It means to yoke yourself with the divine. I mean, that is the definition of yoga, and no one practices this, right? Like they're caught up in their Lululemon pants, they're caught up in their yoga posing, they're caught up in whether or not they're vegan, they're caught up in whether or not they're people pleasing. And if they're positive, you know, they have no concept of what it means to actually transcend anything. They don't have the capacity to sit with anyone in their pain, let alone their own. And so it just became like bullshit to me. And I didn't want to fight that anymore. Like I fought it for a long time. I allowed myself to be kind of a rogue teacher for a long time, but I got over it. I was like, this is not my job to convince everybody of you know, the core to this practice, right? So that was another reason why I chose to move on. In the end, though, circling back to my point about things being impermanent, you know, the relationship I had with yoga ran its course. When I went to Bali, I sat with an old friend of mine who I had known in my early years. Like I love her for that reason. Like she knew me when I was just this, you know, kid, and I'd finished the advanced B series, and she said, you know, it's interesting that you have finished the B series. She goes, because the few people who do, they go one way or the other. And, you know, a lot of them might continue, but the other half of them, they abandon the practice altogether. They're just done. They're just done like they never participated to begin with. And I found that was me. And, you know, once you've kind of climbed the summit of a mountain, you don't keep climbing, right? Because there's nowhere to go. You could only go back down the mountain and then climb another mountain. But that next mountain's going to have a different set of challenges and a different view. And when I finished the B series, I realized a bunch of things, like very hard on the body, especially as a woman, okay? Not good for the reproductive system. So if you want to have children, I'd say avoid it. And it really was, it's like fourth series is something that you visit. It's not a place you live. And it's a practice that, you know, really is for the bored overachiever. There is nothing about contorting yourself that is going to give you more enlightenment. Nothing. Okay. And so I realized this, and even after I stopped fourth series, I didn't stop practicing. It was another year or so, year and a half maybe. But I scaled it back to very basic practice because I knew that on the physical level, I only needed basics. Like in order to have a mobile body, you don't have to go to extremes. Like second series is good enough for a healthy mobile body. And, you know, again, like as I kept evolving in my own life, I had been assaulted physically. I wrote a book and my priorities were shifting and what I wanted to experience and learn was changing. And the yoga practice was just no longer this centerpiece, right? If I had been married to someone for 20 plus years, and we were growing in different directions, that it doesn't mean that we don't love each other anymore, but that relationship has obviously run its course. My relationship to yoga had run its course. And the essence of the practice, you know, meditation, knowing when to slow down my breathing, just being present, being in a state of observation, you know, all of the yamas and the niyamas, like they stay with me on a daily basis. There's no part of me that like abandoned that. But the need to make that asana practice the centerpiece of my world, no. Like I'm changing, my needs are changing. And I think it's really important also to recognize people have this tendency to think that once they found yoga, they like found the Holy Grail. Like all of a sudden, that missing link to their reason for being has been filled. The reality is that like everything is constantly cycling. Like life is this wheel that's always turning. And so even when you hit that place where you're like, I am so fulfilled, everything is so wonderful, that wheel doesn't stop turning, right? So we're still evolving. And I had a long discussion with an old Indian man one day, and you know, this was towards the end of my yoga career, and I said, I just don't have that need to go off and to be in that space, and to, you know, in fact, it doesn't even make sense to me that people want to renounce everything and go away. And in fact, it feels more like escapism. And he said, most people in the West, they practice renunciation prematurely. Okay, they're not ready to give it up. He goes, but even if you do get to a place of renouncing everything and like giving up your entire identity, which happened to me at the end of my yoga practice relationship, you go back, right? Because things are cyclical. So then at that point, you would take what you've learned and you would go back into the community, back into living that normal mundane life, back into helping those who aren't enlightened, right? Like you would go back into that space to help people, and it becomes just part of that cycle. It doesn't end. It's not like you get to this point in fourth series and go, okay, I'm enlightened and I don't have to do my laundry anymore, right? Like we're constantly going on that cycle of life. And that's what I found was after my relationship to my yoga practice had essentially run its course and died, it was time to be reborn psychologically and emotionally, and to put my efforts and energy into a completely new life, a completely new identity. And I've been enjoying every aspect of that. Like there's no loss there. I didn't didn't have this awful divorce with my yoga practice. Like, I am so grateful. I love the fact that I've been able to travel and teach. And I love that I finished 4th series. I started 5th series, actually. I'm so grateful for the amazing footage that I have with Alessandro Sigismondi. I'm really, I'm so grateful. Like, that era was incredible, but it's just done now. So, it's not the end all be all, right? Like, if you go the full spectrum, you really spend, and people also don't realize that, like, I'm a highly, highly, highly introverted person, and I started isolating myself out of survival at a very young age. So I've been doing the inner work since I was a child. So this is not like just physical for me. Like, I've been spending my life kind of dissecting who I am, why I'm here, and that connection to the divine. So it's just that, my purpose at this point has shifted, and who I am and what I want to experience has also shifted. So I wanted to create this video to, give people that perspective, and know that it's okay. It's okay if something runs its course and dies and you have to recreate your life. It's totally okay. In fact, it's incredible to have the privilege to live another life in the course of one. So that's all. I hope that was helpful, and I'm thoroughly, enjoying all the new things I'm learning about and who I'm becoming. And it's very radically different. And you know what? I love it. This is where I'm at. So that's all, guys. Have a good one. Bye.